Brittany Zimmerman was a young woman full of ambition and plans for the future. At the age of 21, after graduating from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, she was on the verge of a great adult life. Her natural curiosity and passion for scientific work led her towards medicine. Brittany has always dreamed of becoming a doctor, specializing in lung diseases such as asthma and chronic respiratory diseases. She wanted to work at the Center for Disease Control in Hawaii. She already had a clear idea of her career and was ready to study and work to achieve her goals. Brittany's life was filled with the desire to help others. In her spare time, she volunteered and supported health-related projects. Brittany had another important side to her life: personal relationships. It was important for her to build a strong relationship and become a loving and caring girl for the one who became her partner. Her chosen one was Jordan Gonnering, whom she met at university. Their relationship developed naturally, and Jordan soon became an integral part of Brittany's life. He supported her aspirations and dreams, and they both saw a bright future ahead of them. Jordan was the one with whom Brittany shared not only her daily worries, but also her innermost dreams and plans for the future. Together, they sincerely believed that their lives would only improve when they got married and started building a family. Brittany and Jordan seemed like the perfect couple. According to many of their friends and acquaintances, they were a model of harmonious relationships. Their love was stable, full of mutual respect and support. Brittany was an example of how to combine career aspirations and personal happiness. With Jordan, she felt loved and protected. Both of them couldn't wait to become husband and wife. Together, they planned the future. The couple had already discussed possible locations for their future wedding and dreamed of the days when Brittany would begin her career in medicine, helping patients and developing her scientific knowledge. They had every chance to become not only a successful couple, but also people who could change the lives of others. The couple's social circle was also quite wide. Despite her busy studies, Brittany has always remained open and friendly. She had a lot of friends, among whom was her friend Katie Hilton, whom she met back in high school. Katie described Brittany as an incredibly cheerful and caring person. For her, Brittany was an example of human resilience and kindness, despite all the difficulties that a person can face. Brittany's family had a special place in her life. She was born in Wisconsin and was raised in a family where she was taught the values of caring and responsibility. Her mother, Jean Zimmerman, was proud of her daughter and supported Brittany in her dreams, especially when she decided to go into medicine. Brittany was a versatile person. In addition to studying and a busy social life, she had a real love for cats and Japanese anime. Soft toys dedicated to her favorite animated characters were often found in her apartment, and several cats became her constant companions. Everything was going as well as possible: work, studies, personal life. Brittany felt really happy because there were so many bright moments ahead of her. Together with Jordan, they dreamed of the future, and every day they lived brought joy from the fact that they could be together and move forward hand in hand.
Zimmerman was found dead in her apartment in downtown Madison back in 2008.
On April 2, 2008, on a warm spring morning, when most people were just starting their day or finishing their morning chores, the unimaginable happened in the apartment of Brittany Zimmerman and her fiancé, Jordan Gonnering. They both planned to live happily ever after, create a family, and help people. But on this day, Brittany's life was tragically cut short, and she was unable to fulfill all the great plans she had. Everything happened in an instant, and the world that had been filled with light for her turned into a shadow. When Jordan returned home around 1 p.m., he did not expect what he would see. He came to his apartment, located on the first floor of one of the apartment buildings in Madison, and immediately noticed that the door was knocked out. At the same moment, anxiety seized him. Once inside, he was shocked by what he saw. His beloved Brittany was lying unconscious on the floor. He couldn't believe his eyes that the girl he loved was now lying without signs of life. She was his best friend, and now his world has collapsed like a house of cards. The police officers, having learned about the incident, immediately went to the scene. They saw a terrible picture. Brittany's body with stab wounds was lying on the floor, and next to her, there was evidence that she had been brutally attacked. The body was found with a heart wound. The officers began to suspect that the attack had been planned in advance. Criminologists who arrived at the scene found fingerprints which were sent for examination. At this stage, The investigation could not yet determine exactly who might have been involved in the tragedy. However, the evidence indicated that the suspect may have known the victim and may have purposefully chosen the day for his actions. The police also paid attention to important details. For example, the door was damaged, which could indicate an attempted break-in. However, the footprints at the scene gave the impression that the suspect might have known the situation inside well and had the opportunity to leave the room without leaving other obvious signs of forced entry. This led the investigation to believe that someone from Britney's inner circle could have been involved in the case. The absence of signs of a struggle was especially disturbing. This could mean that the victim did not expect the attack, which made the incident even more tragic. Britney was known for her kindness and openness, so it was hard to imagine who could harm her. Investigators began analyzing all possible versions, carefully examining Britney's surroundings. They were considering whether the motives could be related to her past or professional activities. Despite the many questions, the aim of the investigation was the same: to find out the truth and bring the perpetrator to justice. In the first weeks after the murder, the police interviewed many witnesses and acquaintances of Britney, including her relatives, neighbors, and colleagues. One of the first steps was to interview Jordan Gonnering, her fiancé, who returned home to find the apartment door knocked out and Britney unconscious on the floor. He was one of the last people to see her alive. However, despite his deep sorrow and concern, his testimony did not yield any results. After that, the police began looking for possible witnesses among neighbors, friends, and classmates who could tell about any suspicious events in Britney's last days. They asked if strangers had been seen near Britney's apartment, if Britney had conflicts with anyone, and asked anyone who knew anything to come forward with information. However, no specific information could be obtained that could help identify the killer. The question of who might have been in her apartment remained open. The police did not rule out personal revenge or recent conflicts as a possible motive for the crime, but the analysis of this hypothesis also did not lead to accurate conclusions. After several months of investigation, investigators began to put forward theories that suggested that the killer could be connected to one of those who knew Britney on a more personal level, perhaps even romantically. However, there was no evidence to support this version. Further searches also yielded no results. As time passed, the investigation continued, but there were no suspects. Various versions surfaced, but none of them allowed the investigation to advance to clear conclusions. It was a difficult situation for Britney's family, her friends and acquaintances, who every year lost hope of solving the case. Britney's mother, Brittany Zimmerman, relived every update of the investigation, but every year she realized that time was working against her, and her dreams of justice became more distant. Surprisingly, despite the lack of success, the investigators did not give up, continuing to return to the case periodically, hoping for new evidence or modern investigative methods. Despite all efforts, for almost 12 years after the murder of Brittany Zimmerman, the case remained open, and not a single serious step was taken towards its resolution. During this time, new suspects, versions, and theories have appeared many times, but they have not led to definitive results. Many questions remained unanswered, and despite this, investigators continued to search for any clue that could shed light on the death of the young girl. More than a decade has passed since the murder of Brittany Zimmerman, and the investigation continued to stall. Despite numerous witness interviews, evidence collection, and testing of various hypotheses, the case has not come close to completion. However, in 2019, more than a decade later, an event occurred that could have been a turning point in this case. This breakthrough was connected with a letter that was sent to the police back in 2009, when the traces of the criminal seemed to have almost been erased.
In 2017, a man who was in federal prison with Call in West Virginia told investigators Call confessed to him.
The letter that attracted the attention of the police was sent from prison in 2009. Its author turned out to be a prisoner who was in the Fox Lake Correctional Facility. The author of the letter claimed that several prisoners at the facility allegedly boasted about their involvement in the murder of Brittany Zimmerman. He said that these prisoners were talking to each other, boasting that they were allegedly involved in a brutal crime. The letter also contained information that the crime had been carefully planned and that the killers were well acquainted with the victim. Initially, of course, this letter was perceived as an anonymous report with no real evidence. Nevertheless, the police did not ignore him and began investigating the statements made in the letter. However, as in most cases, the initial checks did not yield concrete results, and the suspicions could not be confirmed. The police sent inquiries to the prison, trying to find out which of the prisoners might have been familiar with Britney's murder, but all these attempts did not yield clear conclusions. Years passed, and the case still remained unsolved. However, in 2019, the situation began to change due to advances in the field of criminology, especially in the field of DNA analysis. The technologies used in the investigations have improved significantly, allowing the police to go back to old evidence and find new evidence. One of the most important elements of the new investigation was the analysis of the envelope in which the letter was sent from prison. After additional DNA analysis, it turned out that there were traces of saliva on this envelope, which were compared with a sample found from Britney's apartment, as it later turned out, could belong to David Call. This discovery was a breakthrough in the investigation, as there had previously been no obvious traces linking him to the crime. During further analysis, it was established that the saliva on the envelope really belonged to Call, which gave grounds for further steps in the case.
Call was previously a person of interest after DNA connected to him.
In addition to analyzing the envelope, investigators also used other technologies to analyze DNA collected from Brittany Zimmerman's clothes, which were found on the day of her murder. With the help of new analysis methods, it was possible to extract additional DNA samples from clothes, on which traces comparable to David Call's DNA were also found. This discovery was key to the case, as it confirmed that David Call was indeed connected to Britney's murder. For the first time in many years, there was a connection between the suspect and the crime, and now it became clear that his involvement in the murder was much more likely than previously thought.
While running his door-to-door scam in the neighborhood, he stopped at Zimmerman's home.
The police were able to establish that Call was often in the area, where he begged and engaged in petty fraud. Neighbors and locals remembered his face, as he regularly visited in search of easy earnings. However, none of the residents of the area at that time could have imagined that the devil was hiding among them. In addition, investigators discovered that David Call was seen near Britney's apartment on the day of the murder. He tried several times to conspire with women in the area, which was also confirmed by local residents. These facts became key elements for further investigation, as they provided the basis for Call's connection to the crime scene, despite his attempts to avoid responsibility. However, despite these facts, David Call continued to deny his involvement in Britney's murder. He claimed that he was away from the apartment on the day of the murder and was not connected with any crime. In his testimony, he repeatedly stated that he was only a bystander who happened to be near the scene of the incident, but had nothing to do with the murder. These statements by Call were contradictory and were not supported by any real evidence. On the contrary, new information obtained with the help of witnesses and video recordings only reinforced suspicions that Call could be directly connected with the murder of Britney. With each step of the investigation, it became clear that his presence in the area of the apartment could not be accidental. According to the testimony of neighbors, Cale often walked around the area and even went to several nearby shops and cafes located near Britney's apartment. He often approached women, trying to ask for money for supposedly urgent needs, such as fixing broken cars or medical care. However, none of the witnesses linked him to any crime until the murder occurred. Investigators began checking CCTV footage from the area, and they soon discovered that Call had been spotted near Britney's apartment a few minutes before Jordan Gonnering returned home and found his fiancée dead. These recordings also confirmed that Call could have been in the area on the day of the murder, and that his presence was much more closely related to the event than he himself claimed. Based on new evidence, the police were able to link David Call to the murder of Brittany Zimmerman. After the police gathered enough evidence to link David Call to the crime scene, his interrogations became particularly important. He was soon summoned for official questioning, and investigators expected his testimony to reveal new details and possibly even lead to a guilty plea. During the interrogation, which took place a few days after his arrest, David Call finally confessed that he had indeed been near Brittany Zimmerman's apartment on the day of the murder. He admitted that he was in the area where the victim lived that day, and was even near her building a few minutes before Jordan Gonnering returned home and discovered a terrible picture. However, despite admitting his proximity to the crime scene, Cale continued to claim that he had nothing to do with the murder and was not the killer. "I didn't kill her. I was there, but I'm not a criminal," he said several times during the interrogation. According to the investigators, his reactions were contradictory, and he seemed to feel anxious, especially when asked about the details of what had happened in the apartment. He claimed that he was outside the apartment when the murder occurred and did not even see what happened in her apartment. Interrogations revealed contradictions in Call's testimony. The investigators noticed that his version of events had changed several times. For example, in an interview, he said that he saw a woman in the area, but could not explain why he was so close to her apartment. In another statement, he claimed that he was just a passerby and did not notice anything unusual. In addition, Call repeatedly tried to reduce his role in the incident, claiming that he could not have been involved in a brutal crime because he himself was a victim of circumstances. He stated that his life was difficult and that he was depressed by life, which, in his opinion, could explain his presence near the crime scene. Call also often went on to accuse the police, claiming that they were wrong to link him to the murder. He claimed that he was just unlucky to be near the crime scene. He also tried to justify his ambiguity in his testimony, stating that his memory of the events of that day had been disrupted due to stress and mental state. Cale, who suffered from schizophrenia, claimed that he could experience psychosis at the time of the murder, which, according to him, could make it difficult to accurately perceive what was happening. However, despite his attempts to justify himself and confuse the investigators, the evidence gathered during the investigation left no doubt. Surveillance cameras, testimony from neighbors, and information about his presence in the crime area undermined his claims. The police made sure that his presence near the apartment was not accidental. Many investigators considered his admission of presence at the crime scene to be an important step. It became the main element confirming his involvement in the incident. The police regarded this as a tactical move in which Call may have tried to reduce his atrocities by acknowledging only a part of the events in order to avoid more serious consequences. The Brittany Zimmerman murder case, despite many years of investigation and many twists, has finally reached its conclusion in the trial. After years of uncertainty and lack of evidence, the accused, David Call, has appeared in court to answer for his actions. Cale, who was already in prison before his arrest, was charged with premeditated murder in the first degree. His detention stirred up the public and brought long-awaited relief to Britney's family and friends, who hoped for justice. The trial began with the interrogation of Cole, who, despite earlier admissions about his presence at the crime scene, continued to deny his guilt. A lot of evidence was presented during the trial, including the results of DNA tests, which confirmed that Cole was in the immediate vicinity of Britney's apartment at the time of the murder. However, his lawyers continued to insist on his innocence. Prosecutors presented additional evidence that Cole followed the women in the area where Britney lived and sometimes violated their personal boundaries. This, together with the fact that he was spotted near the crime scene, created a convincing picture in which Cole was involved in the tragedy. Special attention at the trial was paid to how Call denied his involvement for a long time, despite the available evidence. This persistent denial, according to prosecutors, emphasized his composure and calculation, which only reinforced the charges of first-degree murder. In the end, the court found David Call guilty of premeditated murder in the first degree. The judge handed down a harsh sentence, which became the final justice for Britney's family, whose life was irrevocably cut short at the very beginning of her career and life path.
56-year-old David Call was sentenced to life in prison today after agreeing to a plea deal.
David Call was sentenced to life in prison without the right to parole. His actions, despite many years of denial and manipulation, led to the tragic death of a young, beautiful woman with a big heart who had her whole life ahead of her. In the following years, a prison regime awaited him, and further progress in the case would concern only issues related to serving his sentence and his possible appeals. Britney's family, despite not being able to get their daughter back, found some solace in the court's verdict. John Zimmerman, the mother of the deceased, was deeply shocked by what happened to her daughter. On that terrible day, she told me that she missed a call from her daughter, one made a few minutes before Call forced his way into her apartment. "It haunts me to this day," Jean admits. "I probably would have been talking to her on the phone when David Call stormed in. There's no doubt about that." Jean says she has preserved Britney's legacy, in part, with an annual scholarship for students graduating from Marshfield High School and raising money on her daughter's behalf for a Marshfield area pet shelter that is building a new facility with a free cat roaming room named in Britney's memory. "She may be gone, but we will never let people forget who she was and what she meant to us," says Jean. The disclosure of the Brittany Zimmerman murder case was a long-awaited moment of justice for her family, friends, and everyone who followed this investigation. The long years of uncertainty, lack of evidence, and ambiguity of motives have finally come to an end thanks to modern technology and the persistent work of investigators. Britney was a bright and kind person whose life ended too soon and unfairly. Her death shocked everyone who knew her and remained a mystery for a long time. But thanks to the tireless efforts of the police, new forensic techniques, and the reopening of the case, the truth finally came to light. This case highlights how important it is not to lose hope and to continue fighting for justice, even if at first glance all paths are closed. For Britney's family, solving the case was a difficult but important step towards coming to terms with the tragedy. And for society, it's a reminder that everyone deserves justice and that technology and perseverance can help solve even the most complex crimes. The trial is over, but the memory of Brittany Zimmerman will remain alive. She will be remembered as a person who sought to help the world and inspired others to do good deeds.